but you've been teaching your child to read all along. Every
Right.
time you talk about a letter and its sound and you read aloud to them, you're teaching them to read.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back today with my good friend Alison Morrow, and we are talking about unschooling, not schooling, and more morphed into simplified homeschooling. We are excited to just bring this encouragement to you. This is part of our homeschool survival series, and I hope this has been a really encouraging series for you. I hope it's really opened your eyes up to what homeschooling can look like and how it can work in your home, because we are all different. Every family is different. Every child is different. Every parent is different. The needs are different in every home. And so our job and our desire is to provide you with the resources and encouragement that you need to homeschool with excellence, no matter what that looks like. If you're doing traditional textbooks or Charlotte Mason or classical or unit studies, or if you're doing a very simplified method of homeschooling, whatever works best for you, do that, or do a little bit of each thing, whatever works best for you. But before you do that, pray and just ask that the Lord would lead you and guide you into what is best for your family in order to lead your kids towards Him. But before we get back into our conversation, I want to thank our sponsor, CTC Math. If you guys are looking for a great online math program, go to ctcmath.com. Try it out for free, ctcmath.com. Alison, welcome back. I am glad that we are having this conversation this week. We are talking about simplified homeschooling. And you talked in the last episode that you have 7 pillars of simplified homeschooling. And so the first 2 were religion, but we'll call that biblical worldview, and then reasoning. And we talked about those 2. So the next 3 are what back in the olden days when we were kids, we talked about the 3 R's, which always was funny to me because, arithmetic and
Only
writing
one of them actually starts with an R.
start with R. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And he said the 3 R's. I'm like, well, I'm smart enough to know that that's only 1 R. So we're going to talk about the 3 R's, but really the R, the W, and the A. And so we're going to talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic and how those play in. And those are important things that we need to teach our kids and be intentional about. How can those work practically in the world of simplified homeschooling? So let's jump into reading first.
Sure. Reading, oh my gosh, I think that and math are the 2 subjects that I know terrify most parents when they start thinking about homeschooling. The thought, if they've got young kids who don't read yet, they're like, oh my gosh, how do I teach them to read? It's so important, and they get so stressed. Same thing with math. The wonderful thing about reading is that if you wait right now, if you're trying to think of, if my child was in public school in kindergarten, they'd be learning how to read right now. That's not what you do. You get to sit back and let your child listen to wonderful books for a nice long time. That is the best way to give your children a reading foundation, to read aloud to them. So in the early years, it is all about reading aloud to them as much as they will let you do. And they don't have to sit next to you the whole time. They can be reading while they're playing, while they're, coloring, whatever it is. Put audiobooks on when you're in the car. Audiobooks are not cheating, by the way, for kids who are learning how to read. It's fantastic for kids who have dyslexia. I have a daughter with dyslexia. Reading for her is audiobooks. And yes, we work on the decoding thing, but audiobooks are fabulous. So it's all about exposure to print, having books around, reading aloud to them. And honestly, you guys, it's just, here's a letter, here's the sound it makes. Here's another letter, and here's the sound it makes. We put them together this way. That is reading. It's just phonics based. It's very simple. You do not have to have a whole big curriculum. Obviously, if you have a child who has something going on like dyslexia, sometimes that's kind of a different story. But generally speaking, you can wait. I recommend waiting until kids are more like 6 or 7 before you even start trying to teach them to read, unless they are begging earlier. Right. And in which case you just say, we might get this now, we might not. Like, we're going to work on it. Your brain might not have all of the locks open, all the doors open that it needs to learn this. So we'll do as much as we can. And it's all good. You really need to pay attention to your child's development and not try to push it. Yes. Don't do a lot of requiring in the early years. Just lots of exposure to books. Let them read what they want to within reason. It's about creating a love of learning, of reading in the beginning. Yeah. And it is not nearly as hard as it might seem. So
yeah.
do not let it scare you.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I like that you talk about audiobooks and the importance of those. We've talked about that a lot on the podcast. And we've actually had several guests on the podcast who have various audiobook, series and programs and things like that.
Nice.
And they're so important. We love audiobooks in our family, and audio dramas too. Those are really fun as well.
Yeah.
But those are great. But also, my youngest, and I've shared this before with my oldest, we used a reading curriculum, but with my youngest, we didn't. And she just kind of learned how to read because we read to her a lot, and we would sit down and have a book open in front of her, and we would read the words, and she would say, "What does that word say?" And I would say, and she would, "Oh, mom," and it just came very naturally for her. It doesn't come as naturally for some kids, and they may need a little bit more help. But that's okay if that's how your kids are wired. And so, but yes, it's not as scary. I think this whole idea of bringing our kids home, especially for those parents who have never homeschooled, maybe they just finished the school year and they're planning to homeschool next year, or maybe they just have a little one who's just going into, the school age. And, their knees are knocking, there's sweat on their brow. They are terrified because, like you said, they don't know what to do. They're trying to figure this out. So that's why we're here to help you. But yes, don't let this terrify you. It can take a lot of times. And God has made our brains with the ability to learn. And I think we underestimate how God has created our brains to work sometimes.
Yes.
So,
oh my gosh. We are built. There's a quote somewhere that says, fish swim, birds fly, human beings learn. Like that.
Yeah,
God created us to be learners. That is what we do all the time. We're learning. And kids, I mean, we talk about kids being sponges, how they, they pick up the stuff that we don't even want them to pick up because they're such sponges, but when you know that your child is eager to learn and you don't crush it by requiring all sorts of stuff and making it boring and making them sit down when their body is not made to sit down yet. It's made to explore and run and climb and engage physically with the world. That's the biggest thing in the early years, is not doing anything academic. Letting them just reading aloud as much as you can and teaching through life, which parents are wired to do. We already do that. We're already counting things, and pointing out letters and singing the alphabet song, and all that stuff is pre-learning activities for math and reading. We do it all the time, just naturally.
Right.
But for some reason, when we say, oh, now it's time to learn to read, we think, oh my gosh, we can't do that. Right. But you've been teaching your child to read all along. Every time you talk about a letter and its sound and you read aloud to them, you're teaching them to read. Don't get freaked out by the thought that, oh, it's an academic subject. And now suddenly I'm not qualified. Doesn't work that way.
Nope. God's going to give you what you need to teach your kids what they need to learn. So, okay. So that's reading. We love reading. Lots of read alouds. I love that you talk about that. Read aloud to your kids as much as you can. And it doesn't all have to be at one time. You can read to them, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, and 10 minutes in the evening. I mean, that's 30 minutes of reading. And that's a whole lot of reading in a day and in a week. I mean, it adds up very, very quickly. So spend time reading to your kids, and the relationship that it builds between a parent and child to read to your kids is so important. And it's so gratifying. I love reading with my girls. I've talked about this lots on the podcast, but I still read to my 16-year-old. I mean, usually we have a book that we are all reading together, the three of us. And I love it. It's my favorite part of the day, sitting and reading to my kids. It's so much fun. So, okay. So reading. So let's take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about writing and arithmetic, the other two non-R's. We'll be right back.
What we do at IEW is break through the noise of the grammar and the writing prompts. And we say, this is what you do step by step. And I've witnessed it over and over again, both watching Andrew teach and hearing from parents, this is the best writing program. We've made it so easy and made it really affordable. So any mom can teach writing to their children using our course, and we guarantee it.
To try 3 weeks of free lessons, visit IEW.com. We are back with Alison. All right, so we talked about reading. Let's talk about writing, and what does that look like with Simplified Homeschooling? Because that seems like a big one. I mean, that's one that writing, okay, now maybe my kid knows how to read, but how do I teach them how to write?
Yeah. So when we talk about writing, we're actually talking about two different things. We have handwriting and we have composition. And one of the things I would say is, particularly as you start working with your kids as they're a little older, don't let one get in the way of the other. So in the younger years, you're not expecting your kids to write sentences. You're not expecting them to come up with, paragraphs on their own. That's completely developmentally inappropriate for young children, even though that's what they're doing in public schools.
Yeah.
We want to work with our children's development, right? And so what that looks like is giving them lots of opportunities to scribble. Scribbling is a pre-writing activity. If you ever watch a kid write, do what they, if they say, look, mommy, I'm writing a letter, you see lots of this, right?
Yes.
Which is like cursive. You can teach a young child cursive very easily because they're already doing this loopy kind of stuff. So you can, as you start teaching them handwriting, which again, I would not do until they're 6, 5 or 6, maybe. Remember that their hands need to be able to grip and do fine motor control.
Right.
Honestly, a 7-year-old hand, a 6-year-old hand is far better suited to that than a 5-year-old hand. Do not ask your child to sit and do copy work or anything until they are old enough to be able to really do that. But when you get to that age, let's say 6, 7, 8, just having them for learning how to write, like handwrite, just have them do what we call copy work.
Yep.
Get a Bible verse, get a hymn, get, little sayings or proverbs or your address or names. I mean, whatever, things that you want them to learn how to write.
Yeah.
And you just have them copy them. You literally just write a sentence or write, a line of words or whatever it's going to be, and then have them write it and not have them write it 10 times. We don't have to drill things to death. Just say, let's write this sentence today. And it can literally take them 3 or 4 minutes. Does not have to take, get rid of this idea that you have to spend these big chunks of time on stuff. You really don't. So you just let them take however long it's going to take and to copy whatever it is that they're going to copy. And then you move on. And that can really be how they learn to write, just copying things down.
Yep.
And then when we move to actual composition, because you've spent all this time reading all these wonderful books to them, they've got a bank in their head of what good writing sounds like.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to instantly become great writers, but you can call back on some of that. Remember that really great word that author used to describe, whatever. Yeah. That would be a great word right here because it's describing, that's what you're trying to describe. You can help them make those connections between that vocabulary they've built and them trying to describe things. And so as they start writing sentences, you start basic. Well, we need to have a thing doing something. That's our subject. That's our verb. And no, you don't have to do the whole grammar, teaching all the little bits and pieces and things like that. Really, we need our kids to be able to write.
You don't have to diagram sentences.
Well, yes, exactly.
That's not simplified homeschooling. That's complicated homeschooling.
Yes. Do not
I'm not saying it's wrong. If you want to diagram and parse out sentences, you go right on ahead. And then you can send it to me.
Some kids love that. Yeah. Not me. I've published 10 books and I'm an English teacher and I still cannot diagram. So do not let anybody tell you that you have to diagram to be a good writer. I haven't a clue how to do that.
Right. I love that.
So you just you're reading these great books to them and then you're teaching them how to create sentences. We group these sentences together. That makes a paragraph. All of these sentences have something to do with this topic. So there's one paragraph. There you go. Now we just build that. Do it again. Do it again. Now we've got an essay. It doesn't have to be this big, complicated thing. And it does not have to be fancy. Clear communication is much more important than fancy communication. Yeah. And so if your child can clearly get their point across, it doesn't matter if it's a big, complex sentence with all sorts of big, fancy words. You want them to be understood. And that is the thing that you work on the most. Right. Saying what you mean, figuring out the best way, the clearest way to say what it is that you want to communicate. And how do we write that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy. It's easy. And going back to the reading really helps them learn how to be good writers. It's not rocket science. Right. It's really not that hard. So, okay, great. So that's reading, writing. Let's talk about the third non-R, which is arithmetic, which starts with an A, not an R, but we're talking about the 3 R's. So we'll just call it arithmetic. So, let's talk about arithmetic.
Arithmetic. And again, I know this is one of those things that freaks people out. There are so many programs that
CTC
can help
math.
You teach math if you feel like you want to use a curriculum. And honestly, it is not a requirement, particularly in the younger years. If you don't have a child who is dying to go into a STEM field, then really the things that are most important are the basics, right?
Yep.
The reading, the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and knowing when and how to apply those.
Mm-hmm.
Real life application of math is so important. And that's the best way to teach it. Taking your kids to the grocery store and showing them how to compare, how to figure out, price per ounce on this versus price per ounce on this, figuring out how to balance a budget, figuring out if this is the money that we have budgeted for groceries, what's the best, that's all math. And we forget that things like that they don't come naturally. Like you got to learn how to apply these things, Yeah. And so by modeling for your kids, this is how we use this form of math. This is when we use this is when we do that. And then you can branch into things even like, geometry, for example. If you have a child who loves to build, they want to start, they want to get the wood and make a bookshelf or make, a table or something. Or you're going to have to talk about angles. You're going to have to talk about geometry. But you're teaching it through things that they like, things that they're wanting to do. Right. And these, looking for these ways to teach through life, particularly with math, makes math so much easier, so much less scary. We tend to say, oh, like I'm a math person. Oh, I'm not a math person. We tend to think of there being like math people. Uh-huh. There is no such thing. It's just people who have who have been taught in a way that resonates with them, and people who've been taught in a traumatic way that has made them think, I never want to, see another math sheet again. Right. Just you don't teach it with trauma. Stay away from, the drill and kill of we're going to do these, multiplication facts. You've got to finish 100 in 3 minutes. Right. Those like drills that we used to do in elementary school. Oh my gosh. You don't have to do that. And here's the other thing too. When you and I were kids, our teachers said all the time, you're not going to walk around with a calculator in your pocket.
Right. Yes, we are.
We are walking around with a calculator in our pocket.
Yep.
Our kids, you know what? And this might be one of those things that people will debate. I don't think it's super important to spend a ton of time forcing your kids to memorize their facts. Over time, they will memorize them because they'll be using them and using them and using them.
Yeah.
But if you have a child who's really resistant to that, is it really worth the fight, the battle, when they can literally just say, hey, Siri, what's 8 times 9?
Yeah.
Like, oops, Siri just popped up on my computer. She's like, yes. I'm, she's saying it in my head. I'm 46-year-old and I still do not know my eights. Like I have a blank space in my head for my eights facts. I've just never learned them. And yet I have become a very successful adult.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's not about having to know all of this stuff. It's about knowing what skill you need to use and when.
Right.
That is the most important thing. And so when you focus on that, and then as your kids get older, middle school, high school, and you start seeing their interests, their talents developing, and they're starting to talk about what they might want to do in the future. If you see a kid who's moving in a STEM direction, that's when you say, okay, let's formalize this. Let's dig into this. And they're going to be so intrinsically motivated to do that because it's going to get them where they want to go.
Yes.
You're not going to have the battles. They're going to be like, okay, I want to get into that program.
Yeah.
So I got to learn this. And they'll learn it so much faster because they're intrinsically motivated. Right. Instead of you sitting down and saying, you have to work on this for 20 minutes and then having that fighting all day.
Right. It's because they realize and discover how God created them and who he created them to be. And we've heard lots of stories about that. Dorinda Wilson is one, that comes to mind, that her, she had a son who didn't like school, and he was like, hey, Mom, can I get this book on coding? And she's like, yeah, sure. And didn't know he knew anything. He didn't really know anything about it, but there was something about that interested him. And, now he's a very successful, programmer, and, and it's amazing. And she just was, I think he was like 13 at the time. She was like, I never would have imagined that he would enjoy something like that. But, he discovered what his bent was. And so it's fun. Have you heard of the book? I was just talking to a friend about this the other day. It's called All the Math You'll Ever Need, a self-teaching guide by Steve Slavin. I don't know if you have
not, but I like the sound of it. Yeah. I need to check that out.
I'll put a link to this. I actually checked it out from the library last summer, and I need to check it out again because, okay. If you're a math person, because, Alison says there's no math people and not math people. I might disagree with you there because I'm not a math person. But I have many friends who enjoy math. I should say I don't enjoy math, and I have friends who do enjoy math.
That is true. Yeah.
But this book is one that I'm like, this is good for the rest of us. Like all the math you need to know. What do you need to get through life? And so that's basically what this book is. And it's quite a fascinating book. I think it's been around for quite some time, but it's called All the Math You'll Ever Need. And so yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So yeah, this is all good stuff. We're talking about reading, writing, arithmetic. I love all that you're saying about all these things. This is great encouragement for that mom who just wants to simplify her homeschooling. But we are out of time. We're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to talk about the last two pillars, which are responsibility and recreation. And those are really fun and exciting things to talk about. We love talking about responsibility. And we love recreation as well. So thank you, Alison, for being with us again today. And thank you guys for joining us again today. I hope you've been encouraged. If you've not left a review for this podcast, we would love it if you would do that either on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and just leave a comment because people read those comments and we love to read the comments that you guys do leave and to know how this podcast is encouraging you. Or go to iTunes and leave a comment on there and just encourage others to listen if it's a blessing to you. So thank you so much. If it's not a blessing to you, well, then you probably wouldn't be listening, but let us know if there's a way that we can serve you. If there's questions you have about homeschooling, guests that you would like to have on the show, let us know. Feel free to send us an email, podcast@schoolhouserocked.com. But we would really love it if you would leave a review. Have a great rest of your day and we'll be back with you tomorrow. Bye.
A mom said to me one time, "Aren't you worried about sheltering your children?" And I said to her, we care more about sheltering tomato plants in the culture right now than we do about our precious children. And so if someone wants to accuse me of sheltering my children, my answer is always absolutely yes. I will shelter my child until I know my child can stand up against the elements of the culture so that they can grow to maturity. And we slowly begin to remove the shelter from around them as we see that they are mature and that they understand the battle lines around them and can engage the culture from a position of strength rather than weakness.